Hello and welcome to another episode of Literary Liberation Podcast. Today we will be discussing, analyzing, and reviewing The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. Kristen and I have adopted a Palestinian family that is currently still stuck in Gaza. Mohammed's neighborhood was bombed and killed 22 members of his family, leaving him responsible for his 4 younger siblings who were pulled from the rubble. We have their family's GoFundMe linked in the description, and they are very close to their goal. Please donate below. I'll see if I can find any updates with the ceasefire and what's going on with them. I know the last time they had posted was at the very beginning of January, and they were very appreciative for all of the donations that they had received so far. But there's still a long way for them to go, and we don't know what the future holds with this temporary ceasefire. So I'll try to find an update and then maybe link it or put it in the description. For more content outside of the podcast, please check out our Instagram and TikTok at Literary Liberation Pod. Nope, it's just at Literary Liberation, and Twitter at LitLib Podcast. We're also on Fable and Blue Sky. We're on pretty much everything.
Mm-hmm. On
Just putting
Fable,
that out there. So if you
LitLib
see our
Pod.
logo, it's us.
Yeah. LitLib Pod on Fable to join our book club as well. That we
Yes, this month for February, we are reading
Chain
Chain
Gang.
Gang All Stars by Nana Kamwe. I cannot pronounce the whole name. I need to look
We're
that
going
up.
to look that up before the episode for sure.
But so far, it's very good. We thought it would be a good book for Black History Month.
Mm-hmm.
So check it out if you want to read books like that, or if you have ideas for books that you want to read and discuss with other people who are left wing. Like, join it. It's been fun. Last month we did The Dispossessed, and that was really cool. So I don't know what March is going to hold. So if anyone has any ideas, feel free to go put that in the Fable general chat or lobby chat, and we can look into it. I'm your co-host Mariah, and you can find me at Hungry Riot on all social media platforms.
And I'm your co-host Kristen. You can find me at KRXXTXN on all social media platforms.
So, Kristen and I this year we really wanted to read Toni Morrison, and we thought what a better time to do it than to read it during Black History Month as a way to kick it off. We decided we were torn between reading Beloved, which is the most popular book,
Mm-hmm.
and this one, The Bluest Eye, which is her first book that she's ever published. We ended up going with this one just because I think a lot of people have covered Beloved by Toni Morrison, so we wanted to read this one and see what it was about. So that's what we're going to be talking about today.
I didn't even know it was her debut novel until after I'd finished the book. Like,
Same. I had no idea.
saw like in the description thing where it's like Toni Morrison's debut novel, and I was like, this is an amazing book to be your first ever fully published novel.
It is an incredible piece of work, especially since it came out in 1970.
Yes.
What she was able to accomplish in such a short amount of pages is truly remarkable, and I think it makes a lot of sense why it is considered a classic. If you
Mm-hmm.
don't know what The Bluest Eye is, it is a book that follows these young black women or black girls. They're like 11 to 13. There's a couple of them, but it's mainly centered around a young girl named Piccola Breedlove, and she wants to have blue eyes because in her eyes, having blue eyes would be like the pinnacle of beauty. So a lot of this is a commentary on the white patriarchal beauty standards and colorism, racism, and it's set in the 1940s, so you're having that like historical fiction element to it. It's a non-linear storyline, um, but it's done in such a beautiful way. I would really recommend it to people. However, you should heed the warning that it is a very heavy read. And although there is not trigger warnings on this in the same way that if you open up a Kindle novel,
Like a
in
modern
most
read. Yeah.
modern reads are going to have content warnings or trigger warnings. So I would look at some reviews just to see like there is like abuse, there is like sexual assault in this. So just keep that in mind. But
TSA
that's
specifically.
that's the TLDR without giving away too much
I know
of what it is.
Storygraph does have a pretty good, like, they're obviously like community gathered too. They have a section of trigger warnings or content warnings throughout these books too. So I'd recommend if you're somebody that is very like that needs those types of things before you read anything type of heavy, I would definitely go check that out because it is a lot. It really is.
Yeah, because
But it's
Kristen
still
and I differ
important.
a lot before going into it. We try to go into books pretty blind without reading reviews or trigger warnings just to
Mhm.
like experience it in its totality. Because sometimes reading those things, we don't have huge triggers, I don't think. Chris and I, we're pretty,
Not reading wise, I don't think.
yeah, we can read pretty much anything. But this is one of those things I do think that some people would
It's
benefit
yes,
from
because it
having that.
is very graphic. Like very graphic. Like it's probably one I think it's probably like I don't read a lot of like graphic books, so they're like things that really do have a lot of like heavy content in this way. I feel like typically I'm reading like obviously I still read like some heavy stuff, but I don't think it's never anything that's like in this realm of how heavy it is with like the CSA and things like that.
Yeah, and I'm curious how her other books are. I have two other ones. I have Beloved and then Love by her. She has a ton of work. I don't remember exactly how many pieces of work that she has, but she's been writing since the 1970s. She passed away 2019. So fairly recently in the last 6 years, which is very sad, but she's made a lot of contributions to literature and kind of set a precedent for this type of speculative work, I guess. Where there's just it's I can see why this is on banned book lists.
Yes. Like obviously like me and Mariah do not support banning books or anything like that, but then this is one of those books that I can understand like why it would not be in like children's libraries, but it's also
Yeah,
like
or like with the rise of like the anti-critical
yeah,
race theory, they wouldn't want people to read stuff like this, which is like all the more reason that I think this is better suited for like teenage. I
I
think
think
anyone that's
yeah,
like
high
13 and
school.
above, you could
Yeah.
probably handle this, even though there are sensitive content, like they're sensitive topics. I think that that age group is still mature enough to be able to
Mhm.
handle it, and
Especially
it's just
because
important.
like the thing is too is that there are children that have experienced this, do experience this still and things like that and can still relate to this book and so in that way it's still helpful I think for other children to see and realize that they're not necessarily alone in these types of things that happen that are very and I think like me and Mariah will kind of be like vaguish whenever we talk about some of the stuff too because I don't really know what like YouTube and Spotify's like content warnings about how in depth we can go about some of the topics, you know, because they are again, it is like a lot.
But we'll get into that once we get into the spoiler zone. I
Yeah.
looked a little bit into Toni Morrison's politics. Um, she didn't really subscribe to anything in particular, which is not uncommon. That I've noticed a lot of Black women who push back against like patriarchy and white supremacy don't tend to cling to the term like feminism because of its history, like in the United States, especially. So she never called herself a feminist. However, a lot of her work is praised as being feminist literature. So I hope people see that and they're not like, oh my God, she's not a feminist. But just not attributing that label to yourself doesn't negate what you're advocating for, if that makes
Or
sense.
what your
Like it's just
actions do. Like
exactly.
if just because the thing is that I think and this is like not to like go off on a tangent too much too, like with the term leftist and things like that, like people are so obsessed with identifying themselves as one specific word or one specific thing or things. And people are much more nuanced than one word or one phrase. And so just because someone doesn't sit there and refer to themselves as a feminist does not mean that they don't fight for equality for women or believe in equality for women either. And especially I think whenever older people where are a lot more like separating from these certain like ideologies that I think a lot of more young people are obsessed with clinging to.
It's a very different thing. So I wanted to have that perspective moving forward, in case people don't read a lot of feminist literature or abolitionist literature. Like you may not know these things. And that's kind of the culture that we're analyzing and reviewing this in the context of. So it's not just like us being like, I don't know. I just think it's important to acknowledge. Like if that makes sense. Let's see. I didn't really see any like controversies
Except
when
for
I
like
looked it up.
from white people, I guess. Probably.
Yeah.
Like, that's where I could see,
So,
like,
because I mean,
controversies, quote, unquote.
book is huge, like, it is has
Mhm,
so many it's the second most popular Toni Morrison book on, Goodreads. It has 273,000 ratings, 19,000 reviews, averaging about 4.12 stars. It overwhelmingly gets positive reviews, like 3 stars and up, most of them are between the 4 and the 5 range. But the controversies are all in the reviews, I think. For me personally, I think it's funny, and it's exactly what you would expect if you've been in these circles and you listen to these talking points. It's so funny. I think Chris and I will probably end up saying like our reviews of it and whether or not we recommend it. Um, and then we'll talk about the reviews and then we can kind of reflect back on the work because we are two white women. I think it's important that we're not just like critiquing and picking apart the book or we'll talk about like parts of the book. Obviously, we have our lines,
mhm.
quotes, notes, all of that jazz, but I think it's really interesting to look at the reviews and kind of reflect upon how we as white people can kind of reframe this and show why it's important to read these things.
Yeah.
So, Kristen, we also have not talked. We've been doing this lately where we don't actually review it
To each
with each
other?
other.
Yeah.
We wait until the last minute. So, let's get into it.
I mean, I think obviously we both like the book. Like, I saw on Goodreads you gave it 5 stars. I think I ended up giving it 4 stars on Goodreads, but it's like a 4.25-ish, I think. And it's not like that I really have criticisms. I think a lot of the time it is a very heavy book and a lot of stuff that is, like, uncomfortable to read, and so it's not enjoyable in that way sometimes, and so but it is one of those books that I think you really just sit there and you reflect on, like, every scene that you kind of get and how it's, like, split up. You kind of end up sitting there and, like you feel, like, disgusted with, like, humanity almost, I feel.
It does. It's so interesting because it's technically, like, non-linear in the sense that it's not following characters in a chronological order,
No,
but the
it
way
is
it's
very
done through seasons, and it's more so, like, these characters reflecting on events in their lives that have happened in those correlated seasons, but there's, like, a central group of characters that you're following. There's, like, 5 or 6 main characters that you kinda get perspectives on,
Mhm.
but so I can definitely see, like, it's kinda confusing, like, sometimes, like,
Yeah.
when it would pop up, like, "Wait, who are we talking about right now?"
Because there are definitely scenes too where it's, like, following, like, a character that's only mentioned, like, one time too, and you kind of get, like, their history and their scene and then, like, their relation to, like, white supremacy and, like, how that affects, like, how certain children grow up or certain people and how it affects them in that way, and you kind of sometimes don't really know it's following, like not even, like they're, like, less than a side character too, they end up following, you know? That there's certain not it's not chapters, but, like, sections that it ends up doing that, and I think that is a little bit confusing at certain times because sometimes I'm like, "Why is this person even being brought up? They're not really relevant to the main story at all."
Yeah, I definitely see that.
And I do have a critique of one specific character, which we can talk about more in the spoiler zone-esque, because I don't necessarily want to spoil it. Because I think overwhelmingly, especially if you're a white person, you should read this, but I think this is something that everyone should read. I think it should be, like, taught in schools. Like, I think this would actually like, a high school English class, I think this could be such an important read. Like, this is more important than, like, To Kill a Mockingbird.
I think that's kind of part of it in the sense that, like, most of the books that you read when you're going through school are white centered. Like, they're white centered narratives that are talking about, like, the atrocities that happen. So, this is very unique in the sense that, like, Toni Morrison is a black woman and
Yeah.
she's doing, like, discussing these really heavy topics. And there's a lot of criticisms to be made about, like, To Kill a Mockingbird, the way it's presented and whatnot, but it's, like, put on this pedestal as though it is just, like, accurate Black historical fiction, and I have my own, like, critics of it because it's all done from, like, a white child's, like, naive perspective, whereas this is done in such a different way, and I think it really has a lot
And
more,
it's
like,
still
impact.
a naive perspective too, like getting Claudia's perspective, the main character, is that she's like an 11-year-old, 10, 9, 10, she's young girl that still is not even fully comprehending like the white world around her that is like being forced onto her, and she doesn't even like, you can see that in the way that she talks about like Shirley Temple on TV and things like that, is that she does not even realize like the repercussions of like white supremacy and how it is affecting her life, her family's life, and things like that because she is so young. And like she can see like the small things that like white children will never notice too. Like she notices that like the way that the white adults talk to them, and then the way that the other white kids in school talk to them and stuff like that, and then the way that they're treated by like the lighter skinned kids and things like that. It's like she does notice these nuances, but it's not, she doesn't realize like why it is because she is so young, you know?
Yeah. And I think it's for these reasons I gave it like a 5 star because the writing, it's very poetic.
It is
I like
beautiful.
the structure, like the structure of the story, and the way it explores so many different topics. And if you're to talk about this within like a group setting, I think everyone can like have their own analysis and like what they're able to pull, whether it is just talking about the imagery of like what a marigold is, or the way that like the seasons, like there's like a lot of like symbolism in this book, and then also just talking about like beauty standards and whatnot, and have a more robust conversation, especially if you're somebody that reads a lot of nonfiction. I think you're gonna really enjoy this, especially like Black history in America and understanding like the origins of these beauty standards. I think it's so important, and it's a very hard read, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was, this is like what I think people when they're reading or recommending like literary fiction, um this is what I want,
Mm-hmm. Like this is
but
actually
it never
something
like hits this point.
that is like thoughtful, because like the literary fiction that's like popular on Book Talk, like if you're looking at like Bunny or like, I guess that's like magical realism lit fic sort of thing, but
My
like
year of rest and relaxation
they
or
say
whatever.
a whole lot of nothing, you know? Like they're not really critiquing society. They're more just like characters that exist in society, the active society around them. Where this is like a direct critique on society, you know? Like it's directly doing these things and talking about these things through the perspective of a child. Well,
Sorry for the technical difficulties. Anyways, I thought we could just get into the reviews, and then maybe we
okay.
can talk about the
The
book.
bad
And
reviews specifically.
yeah, because I feel like most people know like the good stuff about this because it's so popular. So
So,
let's
is
just,
this spoiler zone now then? Specifically?
yeah.
Okay. So, if you have not read The Blue Sky, go read it and then come back and listen to the rest. Ooh, sorry. The rest of the podcast, because it is very good. It's a very short read. I'm telling you, like I think my Kindle said it would only take me like 4 5 hours to read it. So it was not a long read at all. I read it very quickly.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a very quick read. But do it with friends.
Yeah, it's definitely
Don't
don't,
embark on this on your own because
or
otherwise you're gonna
we
be
can be
alone.
your friend and you can comment below and talk to us.
Yeah, please.
Anyways,
All right. Let's get into the negative reviews on Goodreads because that's where I find the best stuff. Anyways, so this person named Melanie, mind you, I found a lot, 99% of the reviews in the 1 star zone white.
oh,
First of all, so surprise.
eh?
Anyways, so this is what Melanie said. I only read this trash in its entirety because I have to use it for a research paper I'm writing. I'm sick of Morrison's books being labeled as historical fiction, when in reality, it is just her anti white people, racist, God hating propaganda garbage. And I've had it up to here with this crap.
Okay.
I think that's so interesting that that's the only thing you extracted is that it's like anti
Anti-white
it's
racist.
white racism because
Well, Melody, I think it's something interesting that you may know. In the United States and most places in the world, let's take a vote. Mariah, do you know who has the most power in the United States and Europe and most countries? What type of people is it?
Certainly white supremacist ideology is not pervasive in any way, shape, or form.
And so, in that way, do you really think people critiquing the society that exists, where it's majority white choices that are disproportionately affecting other groups of people, not positively, Melanie, do you think that maybe they might have a problem with some white people? Because I think I would, and
This
I
is the
do.
thing, like, I don't understand this perspective because it can only be done from a place of, like, sheer ignorance
Like, you have
or
to be so
uneducation.
unaware. Like, you have no idea what's
Which
going
is like,
on.
if you don't know the histories, like the way that Christianity has been utilized as a tool to subjugate and oppress Black people in America, historical fact that happened. You should
Yeah.
look at Angela Davis's Woman Race and Class in the early chapters of that talks about different priests that were utilizing the 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 preachings to say like actually it is morally just to enslave under other human beings. Like they
Not like the
use that.
Bible doesn't even, like, say that you're like, it literally talks about you being allowed to own slaves or whatever. Like, "Oh, yeah, that just nothing God-hating propaganda. Maybe you should look at what your God is writing down or telling people to
I
write
don't
down."
think that, like, it must have hit a nerve. It must have hit a nerve where you felt so insecure and so frustrated. It's like, that's the point is, though, is, like, this book is supposed to make you feel especially
Yes.
uncomfortable if you are somebody who is fitting these beauty types. Like,
And
if you
benefit
have
off
light
of
skin, if you
this.
have light-colored eyes, like, yeah,
Yeah.
like, that's the thing. Like, that is the standard, and there's a lot of historical events that have taken place, which you can read about in Fearing the Black Body by I can never remember, Sabrina Strings. She talks about like the development of these like Eurocentric beauty standards, like where they came in from and how like they would be attributed to the black body, which is such an important piece of work. But sitting here, going on Goodreads and typing up how you think it's anti-white people racism just kind of shows the problem might be
No thought
you,
you were
and
in your
you should
head.
have reread it
I wanna
or
know what
something.
research paper you're writing, first of all, Melanie. Let me see that. Let me see that.
I don't know. There was quite a lot in here that were saying that they were reading it for the only reason I was reading this was for a class, so I don't know. Um, let's see what else. There was a man who said, white man, Sean Bars on Goodreads says the very long written out review that I copied and pasted in here, but like the main point was that it takes a lot to put me off. I read Lolita without any complaints about the pedophilia. Sometimes it's necessary to show despicable things in order to create art. And I think that's like really divorced from what exactly the depiction of that in this book, like the utility, why that was in there. And it's the whole premise of this is about perpetuating harm. Like the
Yes.
origination that even people who like they were all children, like people are all children at one point and harmful things happen to them and then they can
Continue.
perpetuate that
Yeah.
harm unless you can actively stop the cycle. Like
And
that is kind
unlearn.
of why you're getting the adult perspectives and like what led them to do these things to their own children, like why they can't fully love them. It's like, do you think that the characters in this story, had they been given all of the tools to succeed and be materially comforted and like socially and emotionally, do you think they would be perpetuating that harm? Like that's the essence of this is to speculate about how can you prevent these things from happening. It's not just saying
Mhm.
that these are bad people in a vacuum, but they're a product of their conditions. And it's so divorced from any sort of like transformative justice. I thought that was an important point. I don't know if you have any thoughts about it because I
Well,
don't yeah,
because
I know you wanted to talk about one scene or character and I don't know
well
which one it is.
it's, so what's his name? Something Church, the
Yeah.
priest guy, because there is obviously this man is a pedophile, but there was there was a certain line or something saying that he could be a homosexual, and I think it was a little weird to make like the homosexual character into a pedophile as well, especially like obviously I understand like the historical context of that, and like nowadays reading it it's not the same because we know like the way that conservatives and right wingers and stuff like to perpetuate that all like gay people or LGBTQIA or trans people are all pedophiles trying to touch children or whatever. And so it almost to me, because we have like this modern 2025 framework of that, it felt like a harmful narrative to put upon someone whenever you could have just made them straight. You know, like there didn't need to be the sentence of him being he could have been a homosexual if he tried or whatever was the line, and
Yeah.
that was just something that I think was a very like, obviously, I can understand historically, but I think looking through it, you have like, we're looking through it with modern eyes as well, which is, like, what makes classics so relevant to now is being able to have them be timeless, and some things just are not always timeless, and so just because there is, like, this negative stereotype of a gay person in this novel does not negate the other things that are brought up in this, but it's still not a positive or a helpful representation in this book at
Yeah,
all.
and I think, like, part of it could have been like, this is where her religious critique, the Christian critique, because it's, like, throughout the entire story with, is it Paulina was the one that's very
That's Pacola's
religious.
mother.
Yeah,
Yes,
right? She's the one
she
that's
started
super
going to
religious,
church, yeah.
and it talks about, like, her, right? And, like, how she does all these things, and there I think it was the other, like, Claudia and
Frida?
Frida? There wasn't their mom also, really involved in the church?
I don't they didn't really focus on their mom too
Okay,
much.
maybe
I
that
don't
okay, so it
think
must have just been Paulina's mom who was, like,
Pacola's
super
mom.
into it because of the punitive aspect to it, and I thought that was more, like, his character may have been to be that standpoint of, like, if you do it from this religious perspective, that you can find ways to, like, write off the harm that you do because it's, like, in the end of things, like, being able to ascend to the heavens is the goal, but it is dated, and it could have been reworked.
Mhm.
But this being her first novel and the time setting, it comes off as a really bad stereotype, so I wouldn't
Yeah.
yeah, I agree, but I was like, that's the only perspective I can think maybe she was trying to get at, but it no.
I don't know,
It
I
honestly,
just
I think that
doesn't
part
feel
could have been cut out
yeah.
completely.
Like, I really don't I that's one of those characters that I was really like, I don't know, like, I don't really understand the significance of it. I'm also, again, never grown up religious. I don't have a very strong religious background. I felt like the critiques of religion within Pauline section of the Mrs. Breedlove's section of the story, I felt like that was clear and concise enough where they didn't really need like a preacher character in that way to like especially because like I think too like in the modern day like it comes out all the time about different preachers ending up being terrible people sort of thing, but then it's also just to be like but he could have been homosexual but he touches little girl. And so then I was like I don't understand the even the correlation with that, to be honest.
Yeah, 100%, like, you're not wrong.
Like, well, then is he a homosexual? Like, I don't get that. Like, I really don't get that connection, like, at all. And I think, like, relating it to queerness just felt very harmful, very dated, which obviously, like, the book is from the 70s. Of course, it's going to be dated, but it's like, this is why we
Curious
can look at
in
it.
her other books if there's still that or if she moved past it, because I know she wrote books for a very long time, so maybe in the more I don't know if she had anything published after, like, the year 2000.
I'm not sure. I mean, because I only
Maybe
really know, like, Beloved, The Bluest Eyes, and then I know she was, like, mostly known for, like, her poetry, I thought.
I'll have to look up when Paradise came out because that was the other one by Toni Morrison. Anyways, what else? There was a woman named Emily who said that it was pretentious, preachy, and annoying, and said while the base idea of the themes is good, the idea is lost in how abuse and overuse how abused and overused they are in the novel. And then she's like, I can't take it anymore. Please tell me there's somebody who agrees with me, XD. Like, And then she's like, actually, I did end up finishing this. She said, I thought the execution could have been better. This book did open my eyes to the self image issues Black girls have about not being white. I didn't know that was a thing they struggled with. To me, all shades of Black are beautiful in their own ways. I love everything she's trying to get across, and her heart is more than in the right place. I felt like that was very like white saviory and tone policing to be
Did
like,
she give it
your
1
heart's in
star?
the right place. Yeah.
So you thought so you did learn something from it, but then you still only gave it 1 star?
Yeah, she ended up editing her review after she had like DNF'd it. She was only like 50 pages into it or something. On page 50, and she's like, I'm already that had more than I can take. Um
Okay.
I don't remember anything horrible happening at page 50, truly. Um it's not
No.
until way later.
Well, the thing is too is that I was reading it on the Kindle, and I think you were too, so I don't really know what page 50 was exactly because sometimes the Kindle versions don't have page numbers, and when that happens, to me off. So I wish I knew, like, what percentage that was at, because 'cause that's gotta be before the first half, I would assume, 50 pages.
That's what I was thinking too. It's like maybe in the first bit of winter, maybe. So I was very confused by that. There's quite a lot of um comments in the reviews of the like 1 and 2 star where it felt like there was a bunch of white women that went into this expecting it to be like that book The Help
Oh, I've only seen the
and like the
movie.
movie. So like
They were
I thought that
expecting a
was
white
really
person to come up and fix everything, I guess. When in
yeah.
reality, white people are the ones that caused this mess, and it's still going on. So there's nothing for them to quote unquote fix, I guess.
Here's like so this I think kind of encapsulates what like the general vibe or the mindset that a lot of these people had in the 2 star reviews. This woman named Helene said, I strongly dislike the execution of the story. Nothing in this book inspires hope. It's 100% full of brutality, loss, heartbreak, and lots of heavy and heartbreaking topics. And to be honest, I felt like it was way too overdone. I almost couldn't breathe when reading this because it kept telling about disaster after disaster. I need a little glimpse of hope somewhere, but I didn't get that. And I think that's the point because there was
No
nothing. Like
hope
they were
for some
trying to
people.
and they were like either like met with white supremacists, whether that was like the Klan, like lynch mobs, this was Jim Crow era, like
Yeah.
all of these things were relevant. Where is the hope in that?
And I think that's one thing that at least like a lot of white people that don't talk to other people outside of other white people, if they're not talking to even like just other marginalized groups or any like other people of color or black people, it's like you don't understand. Like they really like some white people really do not understand white privilege or anything like of this where they're like, "Oh, I can only imagine like there's only like all of this negative stuff where it's like unfortunately, that's how it is for some people where they just keep getting beat down by everything in the world. They have no hope, they have no positives. Like I don't think like that's like you must have a very happy life if you do not understand like how someone can see this and not like be able to pull out any joy because what is joyful about the story? Where's there supposed to be joy at? Like if all of these things were happening to you,
I don't I don't think that these people realize that like the police in these situations would have never been there to help. They never
no.
were. That was not the design. So like
No.
where are they supposed to get help from one another? And then I thought that was really like intentional because you read at the very end and is it summer? Yeah, I think it's
Mhm.
summer is the last chapter where you're hearing like kind of the narrative of other women and people being like, "Oh, poor Piccola, like it's so sad." But they still have like so much in their own lives going on and they don't necessarily have like they're living in the north, right? It's not
Mhm.
just like this they like talk about like the demographic of where they live
I think
and
they
kind of the
do live
way
in the
the
South though.
society is. Huh?
I thought it was the South takes place.
Maybe they went back down because I just was remembering like Choli's
No,
place because he
because
ended up going north
yes, but then he
on
ended
the
up
bus.
going south. No, he
Oh,
went
did
to
he end up going back south? I couldn't remember.
yeah, Macon is in Alabama.
Okay, so maybe that's something to consider. I just don't know why people would expect there to be a happy ending. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that some stories don't have happy endings. Like this is meant to like be thought provoking and make you uncomfortable. And if you've ever read U.S. history, I cannot reiterate this. Like for instance, one of the first books that I finished this year was "They Were Her Property: White Women as Slave Owners in the American South." Fantastic piece of literature because it really does poke holes into the idea that like the help, like, oh, there was like these good white women, but in reality a lot of these white women, whether they were like poor or like middle class or upper class, would still have other enslaved people so that they could like get that leverage up, so they didn't have to be like subjugated by their own husbands. Like they were willing to like do that. And I don't think people realize that
It
us as white people, when we're reading this, have to be considerate of like our proximity to white supremacy because like
mhm.
we benefit from it. So these stories are not suited to make us comfortable. They should make us uncomfortable because we are products of this system and continue to benefit from it, you know?
Yes, it almost reminds me of, like, I don't know if you see online too, the way that people talk about Melania Trump. Have you seen, like, the way that they're like, "Oh my god, she's a feminist icon. She hates her husband, blah, blah, blah." And, like, the way that they almost, like, put her up on a pedestal to be like, "Oh, she wants to divorce her husband. She wore that big hat at the inauguration so he couldn't kiss her, blah, blah, blah. She hates holding his hand, blah, blah, blah." But then they don't like, they're, like, acting like she's some sort of, like, secretly white leftist sort of, like, thing or something where it's like, she is a rich white lady that is profiting off of every single one of your all suffering. She does not give a fuck about you. She could care less if you all died, if you all lived. That has no effect on her. And to sit there and put this like narrative onto certain people is like literally a product of white supremacy. You know?
Yeah, the way that they're like positing her as being like the like hashtag girl boss and like her outfits or whatever she's wearing. I was like, that's kind of circles back to the theme of this with the like white baby doll and
Mm-hmm.
the Shirley Temple of like that Claudia is experiencing with her frustrations with this baby doll where she just like destroys it, like bashes its fucking head and pulls out all its hair, like
Yeah.
absolutely, because it's like symbolic of something that like is unattainable
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of people. Like
Yeah.
Melania Trump is like a thin, beautiful woman that the peak, right, is like redefining what beauty stereotypes have been in like the last 20 years, right? And I don't think we realize like this is also like this story is about beauty standards, and just because they're like rooted in white supremacy doesn't mean they don't affect white people, white women especially, like negatively. Because if you're not fitting that, like if you're like fat or disabled, or
Mm-hmm.
like you're not fitting into those standards of having like long pretty blonde hair or like all of the things, like a nice tan, going to the gym regularly, having like you're not affected by like food apartheid, like you're not gonna be able to fit those standards.
Mm-hmm.
It's frustrating. It's
Yeah. Like
frustrating when I see, I know
like
exactly what
I
you're
know
talking
what you're
about. It keeps
saying,
getting
but
on
it's
my
like
journal.
it's so hard because it's like I get exactly what you're saying, but it feels like we're not the people that need to hear this. The people that need to hear this aren't listening. And
Hope though,
they don't
because we are
listen.
two white faces, and we're talking about popular book talk books, and we've talked about Haunting Adeline. Maybe those people are like still here, and it's like you need to work with this stuff and work and understand. I think this is like another thing is a lot of like white women that don't want to do the work. They don't want to read these like books and history and educate themselves
Outside of
because
their
they don't
comfort
want to be
zone.
uncomfortable. They
No,
don't
because
like that feeling, and it's
and
like you have to be okay with it.
a lot of people, I think too, especially in America living in late stage capitalism, they're reading for what? Escapism. They're not reading to learn. They're not reading to change their perspective. They're reading because they feel like it's something that's away from the news because like especially now, like what do we really have nowadays that are so divorced from like the news or like modern things and stuff like that because I mean like you go on your phone, you go on Twitter, you go on TikTok, you're getting stuff that is I mean objectively it is scary. It is like a lots of things that are going on that are harmful, scary, traumatizing things that we see. you go on to watch a TV show and stuff, and a lot of the times it'll be like a critique of capitalism and things like that. So their idea is that like if they turn off their like thinking, and you can't turn off your thinking with reading something like The Bluest Eye. You know, like everything that is in this book is like so deep, like whether or not it's got a metaphor or something attached to it in that way, there's symbolism attached to every single sentence, every single word that is written in this. There it's so much to analyze and think about and comprehend versus reading something like Fourth Wing, where yes, it is like a deeply political story, but these people are so turned off, like their brains, they're not comprehending, they're not thinking about these things in like an objective way. They don't get that perspective. They don't understand it. They're just like, "Oh, like I just read to have fun or whatever." It's like sometimes you if you're going to read to have fun, that's fine, and you don't want like I have my own books that I'm like reading to not think about, right? Like everybody needs whatever some form of escapism, but that cannot be the only thing that you're consuming is just escapism. You need to sit and reflect and think about your thoughts and think about things that are going on in the world. And it makes you a more empathetic person and it makes you a better person.
And part of me thinks that a lot of these people that are reading for escapism are because they're like attributing it, right? To like every single thing that they read. It is like that lack of critical thinking. So then like we're looking at all of these reviews and whatnot, or like the way that they analyze and work with like akatar or whatever, like they can't even see the point that like even like you were talking before we got on about The Teacher,
Yes.
right, by Frida McFadden. There is obviously like political thought
Yes.
within this without it being intentionally that. Me, when I read my like stupid little alien smut books, like the Urzadox one, what's it called? Fated Mates of the Sea Stand Warlords, is talking about like American imperialism and how they're trying to exploit raw resources from this planet while possibly genociding the people that live there so that they can get like this power source. Like these are things, and I feel like people don't realize that. Like, yeah, you can read them for fun, but it's still there, even if you don't want
Yeah.
it to be there.
But it's like I understand not every single one of your book do you want to have a deep political analysis. You don't have to have a deep political understanding of every single book, but if you're going to go online especially and talk about books, you need to understand like the political understanding of the author of that book and what narrative they are trying to push because in reality books are not like they are art, yes, but they're not art in the way that they're presenting things to you in that you're just like, "Oh, look at this pretty picture, look at this pretty book, look at this pretty story." The author is intentionally like writing a book is hard work. It's a lot. Like it's very complex. It's hours and hours, hundreds of thousands of hours. People are sitting down at a desk at a computer or whatever, typing out all of these things. Their personal biases and their personal thoughts are going to come through their literature. No matter how hard they try not to or they say they don't, they say that they're not political, but, like, so many things are political, people don't even understand that. Like, being able to have full food in your fridge of, like, diverse, like, different vegetables and fruits and stuff like that, that is political, and it's crazy to me that people don't even look at that and think of that. They don't understand that, like, there's food deserts and there's people that don't even have access to having fresh fruit every day or fresh vegetables every day.
It just feels like I'm yelling into the void, but like I feel like we say this so much, so constantly, and I don't know who listens to this all the time because there's not always comments. But like this is like our job as like white people is to like educate one another because we're not trying to talk over, but we're looking at this piece of work and we're trying to do the leg room to educate ourselves so that it's not on like the black community's shoulders to educate us on the ills of white supremacy. We
Yeah,
have to do the work to unlearn that, and we shouldn't expect that. And I think I've noticed this a lot too. We're getting so like off topic. Maybe it's on topic. I don't know.
yeah.
It's all relevant. It froze.
No, you're
Where
good
was I
on my
gonna
side.
go with that? Oh, well, that's good.
Oh, you were just saying
Okay.
about how, like, certain people like, about how black people and people of color and stuff not needing to educate white people on, like, how white supremacy affects them and stuff like that, and you said you've been seeing I assume you're going to say something about how, like, people online are willfully ignorant and they, like, expect people to
It's just not that. They expect, like, Black content creators, whether they're, like, bookish spaces or nonfiction space, or they're just, like, a general just content creator to, like, educate them. They're like, "I don't know what books to read on this," or, like, "Tell me what resources." Like, they're expecting this unwaged emotional labor and
Where it's
mental
like
labor from people that are just making content. Like,
these
they're
things
so much.
already exist. Like, the thing is that you can go onto TikTok and type in, like, whatever, like, specific topic you want. I guarantee there's somebody that's recommending a book on any topic that you want that is by like, I follow specifically Black creators that specifically are like, "Hey, you need to read more Black authors. Here are Black authors I recommend." And so you sitting there going online to be like, "I don't know what to read, blah, blah, blah." Then go into your little search bar, type in, like, I want to read, like, a Black fantasy. I want to read a Black romance. Like, these things are here. These recommendations are here. You don't need to go commenting on to these certain on Black people's TikToks and be like, "Oh, what would you recommend?" I guarantee they already have recommendations for you, you know?
No, really, if you look up the like, those terms and then, like, like, sometimes
Yeah,
it'll just, like, see it because I think the captions help, like, curate the algorithm for what will, like, pop up. Um, so it's just stuff like that. It's very frustrating. And when I was reading through all of these, like, one-star and there's so much more, which I don't even know if we'll have, like, time to completely get to them. I don't know where we're at. If we wanna
we're
talk
already at
about our own
51 minutes.
so, like, we could talk about all day. It's just frustrating to see, like, people and, like, I totally get, like, the education system is set up to fail, right?
Mhm.
This way that, like, the education system is created in a way to not push forth, like, critical thinking. It's not you're not supposed to think about these things or understand how to navigate these spaces, but you can start the
Learn.
ball.
Yeah.
All rolling, like, on, like, what to learn. If you have one book, like, if you pick up, like, Angela Davis's one or, like, any sort of, like, academic nonfiction book, if you go to the back, there's bibliographies, sometimes they're annotated, sometimes there's even book recommendation lists. Look through those, start reading what's on there. Before, like, nonfiction book talk was a thing, I don't know how Kristen ended up finding books like this, but this is what I did at least. I would go into the back and I would read the sources, and the sources would have other things that they would link, and then it was just like this thing. You just like keep going down the hole to
The
learn
list,
about a
yeah.
certain topic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's how
Mhm.
because there I didn't have any other options. So I was just like, well, I'll read this thing, and then it's like, oh, this thing referenced this book, so I'll
Yeah.
read this book. And then
Like,
that's I
it's
don't know that's how you do
like,
things.
it's so sad to say because it's like, it's common sense, you would think, in a way, but then it's also like, I understand that people like, especially in school, you're not really taught, like, how to look at references or anything like that. You're not taught these things, and to act as if these things do not already exist somewhere on the internet to teach you how to do it is the craziest thing to me, you know? And I think that's, like, what one of the main issue is that, like, it can be emotionally exhausting if you have hundreds of people coming into your comments or whatever to be like, "I need this, I need this, I need this." Why don't you sit your little butt down? TikTok comments are not a search engine. There is a search function on TikTok. There is a search function on Google. You can use these things. And that's what people mean whenever they say Google is free. Where yes, it's not always accessible, but you don't have someone holding your hand the entire time you're learning stuff. If you're able to learn like books related to Akatar or whatever, and if you've been able to find every
No, like,
single
if you can look up the whole lore of the Sarah J. Maas verse and figure out how to navigate that, you can learn how to navigate, like, US historical texts and, like, learn. Imma be
yeah,
so real. You can
like
do it, I
it's
promise you.
it's no more complicated than that, it just seems more complicated, and they want it to seem that way, you know? And, like, I can promise you, there's hundreds of thousands of videos. The thing is that education is more accessible than it's ever been, you know? In the last, like, 20 years since, like, even, like, YouTube started or, like, just anything on the internet, it's more accessible than it's ever been, where, yes, misinformation is still relevant and still there, but you can find the truthful texts that have been there from before the internet too, you know?
Yeah,
It's
especially if
just
you start following, like, Black authors that are, like, writing right now, not just ones that are like, historically.
yeah.
You don't have to you can find new Black authors, and they're always on, like, Twitter and Threads replying to people, talking about different things, like, you just have to be plugged in and know where to look. And that's just a good starting point. Is like look at Toni Morrison. See who's writing the blurbs for those. Who's this
Yeah.
person? Angela Davis writes. Oh, maybe I can like check her out. Or like Octavia Butler wrote a blurb for this person. Like, oh, who's
Mhm.
that? Go look it up. Like you have to take the initiative to do it. And I don't know if people just don't want to or what. It's frustrating. Or if it's just like weaponized incompetence,
I think
truthfully.
it is a lot of weaponizing confidence and, like, I don't wanna say, like, laziness, but it is sometimes, you know? Like, you have a supercomputer right here. Oh, there goes mine. You have one
This
in
is
your
not
hand.
sponsored by MagSafe.
Yeah. But, like, you have, like, everything. You have more than what people had 20 years ago that were learning this stuff, and you just sit here like, "I'm waiting for other people to do the work for me." It's like, "No, you need to sit down and do something yourself for once." Unfortunately. And if you are confused, this is why you go into your community. You have people in your community. I guarantee there is different like organizations within your city, even if it's a small city, there's still somebody there that is willing to learn with you or help you learn too. Go talk to your local librarian.
Yeah, people at the library, like there's people in reference, but a lot of people in libraries do outreach stuff too. So
Mhm.
they're way more plugged in than you realize.
But
So, anyways, back to the
the book,
right, like the reviews on that were crazy, and I just
yeah,
didn't think it would be as it would disserve it. We were just talking about like the poetic nature, like this absolutely beautifully written book that is so brutal and raw and heartbreaking,
yeah.
but
Sorry this book isn't hopeful. Like what?
I just
Do you
I
think the same person, like, goes on to, like, Macbeth, written by Shakespeare, and is like, "Where's the hope in Macbeth?" Do you think they do
don't
that or no?
probably not. I was thinking about that. I was like, there's probably like books they have written that are by white authors that have just as equally a sad and heartbreaking ending, and they're just like, this was so moving. Because I think at the beginning, like you read the preface. Sorry,
Yeah,
that's not the right
but
book.
the
Of this, where she
yeah, the
didn't just want
foreword.
it to be what did she say? She didn't want it to be impactful, but she wanted it to be like
Truthful? Like, it was, like because she was talking about how she was talking to one of her neighborhood friends as a child that wished that she had blue eyes, and she was like, "That sounds like the ugliest thing in the world." And so, it was just really interesting because it's like I think Toni Morrison's goal was to understand that, like, with the way that society is that it's being pushed onto the youngest, most vulnerable people in our society that are still affected by this hate and this harm and stuff like that. And we're supposed to be protecting children and young people and making sure that they're safe. And I think this is probably like another thing where we could probably even get into like how children are one of the most oppressed classes, but I don't know too much about children's liberation, which I'm sure you probably know a little bit more than I do about that, but I think that could be like a relevant topic to even look into in relation to this book.
I agree. I like there's just so many different things that are happening at the same time in this because it's just discuss like I think like ultimately like it's like systems of harm, right? And like
Mhm.
what those things are and how a system of like white supremacy can it's not just like an external force, but an internal force. It's something that you put inside yourself, which I think is really interesting when we talk about like misogyny, right? And there's like this idea by some I've noticed I think it's like radical, like bioessentialist feminists who will say like, oh, um, women are safe together without realizing that a lot of women are in fact misogynist because it's internalized. You have
Yeah.
that inside of you and you have to actively work. And it's also towards other people who experience other forms of oppression. Like those are going to internalize themselves inside you because that's the society you live in. That is what you're socialized to believe. So like this whole story explores these like little black girls who have been told that they are not beautiful because they're not white, and you get to see like all of these other perspectives,
Mhm.
because they don't have money, like they don't have access to all of these things, or because they're not men, they don't have like other sorts of means of moving through life. It's hard. It's a very hard book. It's very
Yes.
beautiful. I just I don't know. I don't know what else to say about this. It's good. Like I
Definitely. I mean, obviously, I hope that you made it this far. You read it. It's worth a read. I think this is. I could see Mariah doesn't reread books, but I feel like I could see you rereading this like in 10 years.
Yeah, well, this is maybe even less. Like somebody wanted to reread this with me because there's just so much to it, and like with the symbolism
Mhm.
that I would like to re-experience, but also I want to like touch on some of her other novels before I embark on that mission,
Yeah,
just
I'm
to see
interested in
her style.
Beloved because apparently Beloved is supposed to be like a ghost story.
Yes. Isn't that
Which,
interesting?
yeah, I wonder. I don't know how scary it's supposed to be, but yeah.
Um
Other than
What else
that,
did we wanna say? I hope that we did this justice and we performed, some white on white crime. All of the reviews I found were
why don't
written by
white right?
white people, predominantly white women who just, like, have their heads in the sand, and I think it's so frustrating to see this, and I can't even begin to understand what it's like to navigate the world as a Black woman. I have
Mhm.
so much like admiration for everything
Respect.
that you
Yeah.
have been through, and I will continue to educate myself so that I can try to reduce the workload um
Mhm.
that you all have to do, because this seems exhausting. Very exhausting. I know it's exhausting just trying to educate people on just general misogyny or classism. But to add another layer to that, you deserve the world.
I agree.
And I'm sorry if you have to go through, if you decide to go through and read the 1 and 2 star reviews, more power. It was a lot.
I can only
It was
imagine.
so
I
much.
did not even do that. I was like, okay. I already knew that, like, because, like, you read this book and then, like, even reading, like, Babel is like, I can see what the white people have to say because they're so fucking stupid that they're gonna just be like, oh, I hate when people are racist to white people. Shut up.
Womp.
Anyways, other than that, thanks for listening. Next episode will be on the book we already mentioned earlier, Chain Gang All Stars. Which
Yeah,
we are
I'm excited.
actively reading with our book club too. So if you want our thoughts before the episode is out, check it out there, Lit Lip Pod on Fable. And other than that, I think that's it, right? Okay. Thank you and good night.